Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin at the top of the hour and will be recorded. Feel free to connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account @ReadingByThird. Please use hashtag LearningTuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we will be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, the webinar will begin shortly, but the campaign does want to connect with you on social media. So again, on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account @ReadingByThird. The webinar will begin shortly, and it will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last 20 to 30 minutes to respond to the questions you post during the discussion. The webinar is being recorded, and a link will be emailed on Friday to all who registered, and we are live streaming on Facebook as well. And we will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Also, before we start, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars, always from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, unless specially noted. September 22nd, we have Scaling Virtual Home Visiting, Lessons and Insights. We will learn about the work of the Rapid Response Virtual Home Visiting Collaborative, which has quickly and efficiently worked to scale virtual home visiting programs, which began learning about last November through the Parents and Teachers Model, a collaboration with the University of Southern California. And on September 29th, school district leaders will share the innovative work they are doing to ensure high-tech and high-touch solutions for some of our most vulnerable students. We'll be sure to add a link in the chat box for more information and registration for these upcoming learning opportunities. Joining you now is Yoli Flores, Chief Learning Officer for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar, Ask the Teachers, What Could Success Look Like? Our webinar today continues our Learning Loss Recovery series, which we launched in May in response to the pandemic. Since then, as many of you know, because so many have participated in this series, we've elevated issues around the science of learning loss, the digital divide, the impact on young children and early learning, equipping and supporting parents, the role of philanthropy and broadcast public media, the importance of focusing on acceleration, not remediation, and so much more. You'll see in the chat box, we'll give you a link to that whole series if you want to watch it at some point. Through this series, we have also heard from a wide array of leaders, including parents, funders, state leaders, digital equity advocates, and others. Today, we bring you the voices and perspectives of teachers. As we all know, teachers are on the front lines of this new world. Their widespread concern that too many students will fall even further behind has led to an incredible flurry of efforts just to adjust, adapt, rethink, and innovate. We need to listen to their voices, to hear their stories, and to allow them to help us all imagine what success could look like and what could be achieved in a world where remote learning will be an important component of the new normal. So I'm super excited about today's panel, who you'll meet shortly. And I'm especially excited and grateful to have with us Roberto Rodriguez, who helped us design this webinar and to ensure that the voices of teachers were at the forefront of this discussion. So I'll say a little bit about Roberto and then I'll have him get us started with today's discussion. Roberto Rodriguez is president and CEO of Teach Plus, where he spearheads the movement to grow and strengthen teacher leadership by empowering excellent, experienced, and diverse teachers to advance change in education that will yield success for students. Prior to joining Teach Plus, Roberto served in senior roles in the US Senate and in the White House. From 2009 to 2017, he developed and led President Obama's education initiatives to build systemic change and to improve opportunity and outcomes across the educational continuum. Prior to his service in the White House, Roberto led legislative and education policy development efforts for the late US Senator Ted Kennedy. Roberto began his professional career at the nation's largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization, Unidos US, where he worked to elevate voice and further educational opportunity across the Latino community. So Roberto, thank you for serving as our moderator. I welcome you and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Yoli. It's such a pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so pleased to bring you today's discussion and an opportunity to really connect with our educators on the front line of this crisis to think about how we might move forward in the interests of better serving our students. I want to thank the Campaign for Grade Level Reading for making the space for today's conversation. I want to thank our esteemed panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment, for lending their voice to this discussion. First, let me just introduce myself. As Yoli mentioned, I lead an organization called Teach Plus. Our mission is to empower excellent, experienced, and diverse teachers to take leadership over key policy and practice issues that advance equity, opportunity, and student success. We believe that mission is important today more than ever before. We believe and we practice at Teach Plus equity-driven teacher leadership. So we work to build and advance the teaching profession and to support the voice, the ideas, the vision of our teacher leaders to exercise impact and their voice from their classroom through to the State House. And all of that is in the service of helping to support student opportunity and success and bridge some of the equity and opportunity gaps that we have in our current system today. So let me just spend a moment introducing a couple of objectives and framing for our conversation this afternoon. We've had a wonderful series that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has hosted to delve into some of the contours of what the response looks like for this COVID-19 crisis. Today is a moment for us to learn from and hear from educators that are on the front lines of that crisis, to hear from their tenacity, ingenuity, the work that they do to meet the needs of our learners, make sure that there is a continuity of learning and of support for their students and their families. The past 7 months have been unprecedented in terms of the disruption that we've seen across our education system. We're embarking upon a new school year in many districts. Many districts have already started their school year, kicked that off weeks ago, looking very different for many of us. In some places that might be in-person learning, in other places that might be remote learning, in other places there are hybrid approaches. We want to unpack today a bit more around what's working, what are the solutions that are emerging from this challenge, and how can we best support our educators that are so crucial to our students' success. Our second objective is to introduce you to some of the leaders in our networks that are supporting our educators as first responders to their students' needs and as the lifeline of learning and of engagement for their students over the past 7 months and into this next school year. There have been so many remarkable groups and leaders that have supported our educators from across the country. We want to learn from and unpack some of those lessons this afternoon. So I'm so pleased to introduce you to our panel and respondents for today. First, we have Peggy Brookins, who is the president and CEO of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Peggy came to the National Board from the Engineering and Manufacturing Institute of Technology at Forest High School in Ocala, Florida, where she co-founded that school and served as a director and mathematics instructor there. Peggy is an accomplished National Board certified teacher and a remarkable leader for the teaching profession and for supporting leadership and voice of our teachers across the country. It's also noteworthy that Peggy was appointed by President Barack Obama to President Obama's first ever advisory commission on educational excellence for African Americans. So we're so proud to have you with us today, Peggy. Thank you. We also have with us today Mel Coriel, who is Teach Plus Policy Fellow in Indianapolis, Indiana, and a Senior Research Fellow with us here at Teach Plus. Mel teaches English and Theory of Knowledge at Shortridge High School in Indianapolis, Indiana, and she is a tremendous educator and leader. She's a founding board member of the Indiana Association of IB World Schools, a 2015 Milken Educator Award winner, a 2-time Bezos Educator Scholar, and many more accolades that I won't mention right now. But we're so pleased to have to have Mel as part of our network and to have her voice with us today. And we also are welcoming Natalie Brown to today's webinar. And Natalie is a Teach Plus Texas Senior Policy Fellow. Natalie teaches 2nd grade math and science at Frank Guzik Elementary in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. She is a teacher mentor, an advocate. She practices her bilingualism in great teaching and in policy and advocacy across the state of Texas. And we're so pleased to have her perspective today. And finally, we have Jess Tilley. And Jess Tilley is our commentator. You'll hear from her after some of our other panelists. She's a school-based teacher leader in the Philadelphia School District and coaches teachers around best practices and curriculum across mathematics, supports professional learning and curriculum writing for her district on the front lines of this crisis. So thank you again to all of our panelists for being with us today. It certainly takes a village to respond to some of the challenges that have been posed by COVID-19 in our classrooms and in our schools. And we've been working overtime as a community of educators to meet the needs of students, to help our educators meet the needs of their peers, to inform decisions about teaching and learning that are being made in districts and at the State House from the front lines of this pandemic. We've seen recommendations and voices of our teachers carry to call policymakers and leaders to task on digital equity, on guiding remote learning and implementing back to school plans, on supporting student and teacher well-being, and on supporting emergent bilingual students through this pandemic. We've launched professional learning communities across various states to connect educators, and we've appreciated the importance of connectedness, of educators learning from and with one another through this crisis. And we've engaged teacher voice, and so many of the panelists today that you'll hear from will share with you what their teachers and their peers have been doing to connect their voices in real time to decision makers and to policymakers to respond to this crisis. The two things are really clear through this pandemic. The first is that this is not business as usual this school year. There's a great level of disruption, and that means we have to think about how can we practice grace with our teachers, with our students, with our families. How do we think about moving from and transitioning from what might be a normal start to the school year last year? This year becomes a disruption and a challenge to manage around how we think about scope and sequence, teaching and learning for our students, engaging our students with new tools and new methods for teaching remotely. The second thing that's really clear is that there are opportunities emerging and ideas taking shape and solutions that are emerging from some of the bright spots across this crisis. And so another really interesting piece here for us to unpack is what might we hold on to? What can we learn around how students are engaging in the here and now, how teachers are adapting and rising to this challenge? And how might we think about carrying those learnings forward? And so we want to unpack some of those bright spots for you to hear about today. So we're going to begin by unpacking a recent report here, Barriers to Bridges, which we produced here at Teach Plus about a month ago, and really highlights perspectives and some of the insights from over 500 teachers across 25 states through a focus groups that we conducted across the course of the summer. Two key themes that emerged through those focus groups were the emotional toll that this pandemic has taken on teacher well-being and on our students, and the urgency of the here and now in beginning to bridge that gap in supporting better practices for our educators as they migrate really rapidly to this remote teaching environment that we're seeing so many of our educators experience in a common way. So I'm going to begin here with Mel and invite you, Mel, to take us through some of these key findings and share your experience and your insights from the classroom on some of the findings from Barriers to Bridges.
Thanks, Roberto. I'm going to take a look first at finding one. Teachers recognize the enormous social and emotional toll of the pandemic on students. They want to ensure that school leaders prioritize the mental health and well-being of both students and teachers in the coming school year. So I want to start with what's working well and some of the sort of barriers to bridges that exist for every teacher right now. We are seeing a pivot in social and emotional learning. I hear this from teachers all around the country as I work with them in different capacities. This pandemic has placed us in a situation where we can no longer ignore the social and emotional learning needs of students and teachers. And when I say we, I mean also districts and policymakers. So there is a lot of hope there. And we also have a lot of good guidance there from groups like CASEL, who has really broken down SEL into good practices and good systems. So we know that some community partnerships are strengthening. That's one of the things we need to support SEL. We know that those multi-tiered systems of support that we need for SEL are in some cases better now than ever before. As for example, the assistant principals in my building no longer have to do hall duty and shepherd students to their next class, but instead are calling home to positively check in with families whose students are not engaging. And so we're getting better relationships actually in this virtual world with the families, because we have to communicate with the family in order to reach the kids in some cases. So those things are actually pretty positive in the midst of this, terrible situation. But what I really want to focus on with this finding today is the teacher part of this finding. I want to zoom in on that part of the question. I want to talk about teachers because when the teacher's oxygen mask isn't on, he or she is not going to last very long in helping the children to get what they need. And I don't know if you listened to NPR, but on NPR this morning, teacher mental health was actually in my morning news feed from NPR. I want to talk about teachers because last week I stood on a driveway with a group of 10 teachers, socially distantly, and someone said, how many of us are on antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds? And I was the only teacher who did not raise my hand. And because I mentioned that to a district staff person in a large urban school district this week, and they told me that 67% of the teachers in that large urban school district are on antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication per the insurance company for their school district. So I'm an English teacher. I like metaphors. I like long extended ones. I hope you will permit me. When I think about this, I think that teachers and learners and parents are on a forced expedition into uncharted territory. And before this expedition started, some of us were already hobby explorers. We kind of liked it, right? We had some cold weather gear, maybe from REI, maybe we had some snowshoes, and we had bookmarked some Chrome links to pictures of like trusty St. Bernards and expensive Iditarod sleds, right? We thought it was pretty cool. Others of us were safe and secure. We were in our bookstore coffee shops. We were drinking imported espresso and wearing comfortable cardigans. We had no desire to leave the city at any time, certainly not in the winter and certainly not snowshoeing across the tundra. But now here we are, all of us. We are snowshoeing across the tundra at my school on day 30 or so. And at this point, even the hobbyists are tired of it. They keep trying out new equipment, new apps, only to find that in some cases, their feet would be warmer now if they had just kept wearing the old hiking boots instead of risking open air to try out pair after pair of fancy snow boots. The coffee shop lovers are mourning the loss of what seems like everything they love while watching the hobbyists forge ahead and frantically try out newer, better gear. Coffee shoppers watch the hobbyists and they feel this pressure that they need to be better explorers and try out all of these new apps and these new things. But this just adds to their anxiety and makes it even harder for them to get out of bed and start hiking. I promise this metaphor is almost over. I want to remind these teachers that it is okay to stay on the well-beaten path, behind the tired adventurers, button up your cardigan, remember to eat your food, and ignore the voice in your head that tells you you have to try new things. Teachers know how to teach. Parents know how to parent, and adventurers don't have to remain adventurers when things get tough. So I think something that's needed right now is to go back to those essential pieces that we all know are great for social and emotional learning and for the ways we teach. So every class needs a beginning, a middle, and an end, a mix of alone and together work, and a map that starts with the end in mind and is planned to achieve that end. And we need to focus on that if we want to do well in this environment and keep our teachers working. So finding number 2 follows that. Whether schooling takes place in person, remotely, or as a hybrid, teachers know that teaching and learning will need to look different for the coming school year. They want specific professional development in order to bring their best in this new era, including on how to teach remotely and on how to integrate social and emotional learning into their instruction. I work in a large urban public Title I school district that has provided devices and wireless to all students. During our first week of PD, there was a day where we all just sort of realized that with this virtual learning, we have lost about 80% of the tools that we used to rely on. We can't use our teacher face, which can say, are you okay? Do you need something? I hope your grandma's feeling better, but I know you don't want to talk about it in front of the whole class, so here's just this look. We've lost that, we don't have it. We can't scan their faces really to see whether they understand or need something, or whether their grandmother's feeling better and they look like they're feeling better. And all these tools have been replaced with one computer. And so we have to figure out all of these, we have to figure out how to take everything we've ever learned about teaching and just channel it through this fiber optic cable. And we know that there are things that we desperately need to keep working on in addition to this. So we need to work on social and emotional learning and positive behavioral interventions and scaffolding and spiraling and formative assessments and summative assessments. And then there are all of these apps and systems and programs that really seem like our lifeline for teaching kids at this time. So we get to throw around words like synchronous, asynchronous, blended, Schoology, PowerSchool, Cognity, Dynamic Learning, Microsoft Teams, Google Docs, Screencastify, Loom, VoiceThread, SmartPrep, Padlet, nThinking, Google Voice, Question Bank, Lockdown, Edpuzzle, AssessPrep, Nearpod, ManageBack. Those were all used in one meeting on one day in some PD that we did during the first week of school. And most of those things are things that nobody had ever used before. So if you'll permit me one more metaphor, maybe I have one more after this. Most of us had dipped our feet into these apps, but now we're swimming in a pool and we're teaching each other how to swim, and we're becoming experts in these things, and we're trying to deliver our curriculum this way. Actually, I have one more metaphor besides that. This one's my favorite. Last year was like a boiled egg, and this year is like a scrambled egg. The learning is in the protein, it's still there, and it's still good, but it looks like a completely different meal, and you can't make it without a frying pan or eat it unless you have a fork. So we're all trying to find new ways to do the things that we know are good and deliver them to students through completely different means. So it's a lot. So what's needed? Of course, schools need devices and resources. Of course, administrators are making trade-offs every day, deciding what can be purchased and what can't, which apps can be purchased and which can't. We need more detailed professional development around social and emotional learning, and we need school community partnerships and supports. We need to work to streamline systems of communication so that teachers are not overwhelmed with information coming from multiple sources. Leadership needs to be streamlined. We need to think about teacher medical care and tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 supports as they apply to teachers. What happens when a teacher starts to break down? And I think all of us right now, we need essentialism. We need to focus on what is most important and reinforce what is most important in our classrooms. And then finally, we need to elevate teacher leaders and compensate them for the work they are doing. And in some cases, there are teachers who are teaching twice the job. They have twice the job they had last year for the same pay this year if they're in a blended environment. So that is, I think, all I have to say about finding one and finding two. And I'm gonna send it back to Roberto now that you all have all those metaphors breaking your brains.
Thank you so much, Mel, for the insights and the reflections and the powerful metaphors you've shared. And I'm just going to invite our audience to consider positing some of your questions in the Q&A tab that you see at the bottom of your screen. Mel and Natalie and Peggy and Jess will be with us for the duration of the webinar. So we're looking forward to a conversation. I'm sure that has sparked some ideas and some further questions from our audience. This notion of how we support the well-being of our teachers and a moment to really think and reflect on how might we rise to that challenge to support the mental health and well-being of our educators is so important. It's such an important part of the conversation we're having today as we're trudging across that Arctic together. I'm going to go ahead now and turn to Natalie to share a few of her thoughts and insights on our report. We're going to think a little bit here about the question of how might we adjust teaching and instruction for our students. You hear the mantra so often, our teachers will figure it out. And our teachers are figuring it out in the here and now. But one question we have is, what are we learning about the here and now in terms of teaching and instruction for our students that we want to emerge on the other side of this pandemic? So many of us are wrestling with that question of what does this moment mean for the future of education and for the future of teaching? So Natalie, can I invite you to share some of your reflections on the additional findings and on your experience from your school year?
Sure, thanks, Roberto. So in our third finding, we found that teachers see this moment of crisis as a potential transformative point in education to address inequities in the education system and support innovation in teaching and learning. We believe that schools can and must use it to shape longer-term solutions for the future of education. And so while we have this huge mountain in front of us, teachers will find a way because we know our students are counting on us. And so some things that I've seen changing in my school district and across our country is that school districts are now acting with urgency to fund the resources needed to finally close the digital divide and close inequity gaps. And I get to see this firsthand in my own district. I can see the transformation from last spring to this fall. Like last spring, I was trying to use platforms that my students didn't have access to. Literally, out of 40 students, 38 of my students were using their parents' smartphone to try to access work and curriculum from me last spring. And it just wasn't it wasn't successful for them. And so fast forward to this fall, where my school district has literally spent tens of millions of dollars to ensure that all elementary students have a device. To see their faces when they came, we are just on week 2, but to see their faces when they came 10 days ago to pick up their iPad, you see it in their eyes, oh my gosh, think about all these things that now I can do because I have access to them. And one thing I never thought about that has just arisen this past week is in my own narrow focus and maybe my own ignorance. I'm always focused thinking about the digital divide for my students. I didn't realize what impact it would have on their parents. We gave out hotspots and so much of the data has already been used after 1 week of school. And it's because our families are exploring so many different things like job opportunities and job searches and even being able to do things like stream Netflix. And it just made me realize we have generations of people that this digital divide has included. And we have an opportunity here and now that this pandemic, we always have known that it's there. Right? We've always known that some students don't have access and connectivity is an issue. And we've always been able to just skirt around it as a society because we were always able to go to school in class. But what this pandemic did was shine a light on there and to say technology and access and connectivity is no longer a luxury and we can't allow it to be. Technology and access, connectivity is a right for our students. And so the ability and the doors that open, I'm so excited about because no longer do teachers have to be in a box, right? We've been released from our box. There's no more script curriculum for online teaching. This is new for everybody. And so what I have found and what I know some of my colleagues have found is really the ability to flip our curriculum. So instead of me spending all day doing a read aloud or doing my running records with my students sitting back with me, I can assign all that digitally for them to do at home. And then I can spend my time that I have with them in class really working on the skills that will improve their reading and improve their comprehension skills rather than walking through a read aloud with them because now I'm able to assign that for them to do at home. I also think that teachers across this country are using this opportunity to be motivated and learn new skills. Much like Mel said, I didn't know how to do any of that stuff last semester. All those new things, yes, it can be overwhelming, but teachers are rising to the challenge because we know they benefit our students. And so we see new innovation, new platforms, my ability to now put my students on Seesaw and actually get to hear their thought process, which before, we're going through our normal things in class, but to be able to hear them record themselves and talk to me and engage, even though we're not sitting face to face, is opening so many new doors with them. And so I think that why this is all different, we have to grasp the opportunity, and it will take a while because a paradigm shift doesn't just happen automatically. And yes, the learning curve is steep. In fact, it may not be a curve, it may be more like an incline. But teachers are learning the tools to be able to provide the needs for their students. And those skills, like building these community and partner and family relationships with the school, that will carry us forward. I feel like I have way more communication with our parents now than I ever did before. And it's not that I didn't want to talk to them or engage with them, but parents now are sitting with their students and are engaged in what they're learning. And so those doors of communication have opened. And I think if we take that with us forward, if we take those strong school, family, parent, community relationships that we are building through this pandemic, and if we take forward trying to get all of our students access and connectivity, we take that forward, we're going to see amazing things happen in education. And for our next finding, Our fourth finding from this report was that teachers do want to meet students where they are in their learning and focus their instruction on what matters most. That is one thing that we're able to do now in this pandemic. We're able to tailor and personalize instruction in a way that we may not have been able to do in a traditional classroom. So we support the use of student learning data, including data collected through diagnostic assessments and pairing them with curated or powered standards to tailor their curriculum and pace of teaching. We're able to adjust our pace of teaching and focus on critical standards to personalize and meet the needs of our students in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do before the pandemic. And our last finding is that collaboration across school roles and more distributed leadership in schools is needed to meet the challenges of the coming school year. Deeper partnerships and relationships with families and community partners are also urgently needed to better serve the students, especially our students with disabilities, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged students. Adding these resources and extra staff to schools will make a huge difference moving forward. And this pandemic hit everybody. It just didn't hit schools. And so we really are all in this together. And I think if we continue to deepen those community partnerships, we will see a path forward. Thanks for letting me share those, Roberto.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for those insights. Really appreciate that. And thank you for continuing to bring light to the importance of the digital equity work ahead, which is, just laid bare with this pandemic and so important for our future and for bridging the opportunity gaps in our communities. I'll just end this section of our conversation this afternoon with a few takeaways, if I might, from some of those findings and some of those reflections you heard from Mel and Natalie. You heard Natalie talk about the importance in the moment we have with teacher leadership, the idea that and the opportunity to include and incorporate teachers in decision-making in response to this pandemic, not just as students are coming back to school, but throughout this year in school planning, in adapting instruction, in thinking about how we involve the voices of our accomplished teachers and helping to shape solutions moving forward. There's a real opportunity for that through this pandemic. We want to think about how we can increase resources, particularly for social and emotional health, for our teachers and for our students, given all that we know, all the adversity, and we know that this pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on so many of our students with that might have exceptional needs. Our emergent bilingual students, our undocumented students, our students with disabilities, our economically disadvantaged students. We also recognize the importance of strengthening and doubling down on this connection with parents and with families as true partners in supporting the success of students. And we have so many examples from across our network of our teachers who are realizing the benefit for the first time ever of connecting with their families of their students through Zoom and are seeing the benefit of that. And I know the campaign will really explore some of that in future webinars as we think about that parent-teacher connection, even the benefit of home visits virtually. And finally, thinking about prioritizing resources, making sure that we're investing adequate and equitable resources in response to this pandemic. That is first and foremost something that we've all been advocating for and working toward across our Teach Plus network. So with that, I want to thank Natalie and Mel again for those insights. And I want to go ahead and turn to Peggy at the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards to share some of their work. The National Board is a remarkable network of accomplished educators. We are the master teachers that are living and practicing exceptional instruction day in and day out. And this network has done remarkable things over the course of the last 7 months to connect not just with National Board certified teachers, but with teachers around the country to share exemplary practice, to help those teachers through some of the instructional needs in this migration to remote learning, and thinking about how to mitigate some of the social and emotional needs and engagement strategies that Mel spoke to. We've had the privilege of working with a number of National Board certified teachers through our network at Teach Plus, and I know Peggy has done tremendous work in leading her network forward over these past months and will be so important in these months to come. So Peggy, I'd like to just begin by inviting you to orient us a bit more on the work and particularly on National Board's 5 core propositions. Can you share a bit more about those propositions with our audience and why you believe they're so important for the moment that we're in today?
Thank you, Roberto, and thank you to Mel and Natalie for just taking us into this and focusing on what we all need to focus on right now. And I just want to start off by saying that the National Board was founded in 1987, and our mission is to advance the quality of teaching and learning by maintaining a set of high and rigorous standards to what accomplished teachers should know and be able to do. We do that on a voluntary system of certifying teachers who meet those standards. And then we also advocate for educational reforms to integrate National Board certification into the American education landscape. But we also want to capitalize on National Board certified teachers and their expertise. So we have what we call our 5 core propositions, or, we compare ourselves sometimes to what medicine and what architecture and law do. And we think of the 5 core propositions as our own Hippocratic oath. And we start out with teachers are committed to their students and their learning. And you heard both Mel and Natalie talk about this. And that first core proposition talks about how we form relationships that are so important to learning. And these 5 core propositions are held in common by teachers at all grade levels, all disciplines, and they underscore an accomplished teacher's commitment to advancing student learning and their achievement. And together, these propositions form the basis of all of the standards of National Board, and they describe how teachers interact in a particular content area with their students, with particular developmental levels, and they serve as a foundation for board certification. So the most important piece is that they were created by teachers for teachers, and it's the profession's mark of accomplished teaching. So during these incredible times that we're in right now, when teachers have so many new programs and apps, it's important to hold on to these propositions and their commitments. For example, if we take that first core proposition I told you about, teachers are committed to their students and their learning, teachers are looking for ways to recognize individual differences in their students and adjust their practice accordingly. They understand how students develop and learn, what to do and know about students as they develop in a virtual classroom. What do we know about how to design instruction for a virtual classroom, and how do teachers read students and treat them equitably when these inequalities are in our students' lives everywhere, and they have been brought to light by the current pandemic. And teachers know that this mission transcends cognitive development of their students, and that we are thinking about their social emotional learning, and not only just for students, for our colleagues as well, and what parents are going through. And Mel mentioned a little bit of this also. And the second core proposition is that teachers know the subjects they teach and how to teach those to students. And as a college athlete, we always knew as athletes, in athletics, there is no substitute for power. And power is strength and speed, agility and intuition, all wrapped into one. And all great athletes have that. And I feel like content knowledge and pedagogy are those 2 things when we talk about knowing our subjects and how to teach them. And teachers have to have this firm command of their subject areas and to understand factual information as well as the major themes and concepts that they'll be teaching. They also have to comprehend the process of creative investigation, of inquiry, and where discoveries are made and new knowledge is formed and demonstrated in the work that, you know, their scholars and their artists of students do on a daily basis. And core proposition 3 talks about their responsibility for managing and monitoring student learning. So first and foremost, teachers facilitate educational processes by designing opportunities for learning. You know, how we plan, how we present to students, how we inspire them by the material that we put in front of them, how we promote their participation, support substantive discourse, which has become critically important in this time, and how we sustain that long-term engagement by collaborating and working with our students, working with their parents, working with their communities to understand everything that we can about students. And our core proposition 4 is that teachers think systematically about their practice and learn from experience. And this means that we too are learners. Accomplished teachers always seek opportunities to cultivate their learning. They're savvy students themselves in their own teaching. They think about the value of asking colleagues and administrators and other educators to, you know, take a look at what they're doing, offer critiques of their instructional practice, and then, you know, look at research, create their own research based on how they analyze what's happening within their own practice and how they reflect on that. And then finally, our 5th core proposition is that we are members of learning communities. And accomplished teachers communicate with their students' parents, with their guardians. They inform them about their child's accomplishments and challenges. They respond to their questions, they listen to their concerns, they respect their views, and they bring them into the educational landscape in ways that a lot of parents have not had the opportunity. And we are seeing that in this virtual world as well. And to think about how it has opened up this window to teaching in ways that, you know, wasn't possible on a daily basis for some students and parents, where it may have been on a basis of every 9 weeks you got to have contact with parents other than through email or phone calls. And so what you see on the screen, there's a QR code that's sitting there, the 5 core propositions and the beautiful explication of those 5 core propositions. If you scan that QR code, it will take you there. But not only will it give you a what teachers should know and be able to do book in English, it will also give you one in Spanish. And we have that version ready to go. The other thing you will find there is that there's a facilitation guide, and all of this is free by just going to our website and clicking on that website to take a deep dive into the 5 core propositions. And I know that was quick, but the read is amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Peggy, for introducing us to those core propositions and to these tenets of accomplished teaching. You know, the world has changed in so many ways. Teaching and learning is being reinvented as we speak. So what do you think COVID means to the broader education field at large? And talk to us a little bit about what you've done, what you've prioritized as the leader of the NBCT network since the pandemic hit.
Thanks for that question. And one of the things that we've had to do is pivot on a dime, like everyone else in this country has had to do. So you'll see on the next slide that what we put together was something called a Core Connections webinar. And we've had 60 of those webinars since March. We've had, you know, nearly 41,000 participants registered. We've had over 180,000 on Facebook Live. We've also put together what we call a National Board Academy, where we had about 26,000 participants there. And all of these were based on what we found out from the chat box in each of those webinars, we were not putting on webinars just to put on a webinar and talk about National Board Certification. We were putting on these webinars solely to help and to determine what the needs of teachers were at this particular time. And Mel and Natalie brought up a lot of those needs, like, you know, how do I use this technology? Technology I'd never heard of before. What if my student doesn't have connectivity? What if I don't have connectivity? How do I keep students engaged? Those students who have kind of disappeared once COVID started because there's no one there, you know, making them be in a classroom, whether it be virtual or not, and thinking about how do we present in a way that intrigues students, that excites them, and then, you know, to keep our own sanity about what we're doing in this time. So we put together those virtual tools and platforms. We engage students. We definitely engage parents in the community. One of the biggest pieces of our work we were looking at was looking at self-care, social emotional learning, and virtual learning in general, and how is that designed? How do we meet the needs of the current students in front of us? And then how do we look at specific content area that people had questions about? And then equity and social justice was huge, and you know, bringing in experts to talk about what was important to students. And we could not ignore what was currently going on in the country. And that was one of the biggest things that teachers wanted to be able to have some savvy about. How do I discuss this with my students? And then professional learning itself. And we crowdsourced materials from educators, and there was a bit.ly that we put on our website. It was called Teachers Helping Teachers 2020. And, you know, if you go there, the National Board, you can get to all of these recordings. The resources are all there. It's on our website of mbpts.org /core-connections. And we have left them there. They're free to anyone to go there, replay them. It's specific to the needs of what you're looking for at this particular time. And we were just amazed at how many students came. We had students who were involved as well. How many teachers came, how many people from different areas of education were part of those webinars. And we are very proud of them. We will continue them as well based on the findings and what we've learned.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you for being there for our teachers in this moment as they really navigate the impact of these twin pandemics, you know, as you referenced, not only COVID-19 and the health and economic implications of this pandemic, but the racial oppression and racial injustice that we continue to see across our communities that our learners are trying to make sense of, and that our students are really looking, or that our teachers are looking to for resources and for lessons and for strategies on how to really begin to lead forward to create and help perfect our democracy further, which I truly do believe begins in our classrooms. So we know our teachers learn so much from one another and have relied on one another in so many ways. Thank you for making the space over 180,000 educators to come together and lean on one another across this pandemic. I'm wondering if you could reflect a bit, Peggy, on what you've seen as some emergent themes through these webinars and through these virtual and blended environments for your teachers. What do you see is most on the minds of educators over the course of the pandemic to date, and also as they're going back to school?
So I think one of the things that we have learned, and the biggest thing that we have learned, is there's a need for a sense of community among educators. All of these core connections have been by teachers, for teachers, The things that we have learned from the chat has also built community for educators. They have connected with each other in ways that they were not able to before because they did not know each other before. And the chat gave them an opportunity to say, oh, you're actually in my city. You may be, you know, a district away, but we can connect now because we're connecting virtually. The other thing is just asking questions, sharing resources, and how they were making connections. And then we as an organization also use their expertise by finding out, you know, based on the questions that were asked in the chat, who has expertise in certain areas. And people began to volunteer and then became a part of the Core Connections webinar series. We have a national network for minoritized educators, and that network has put together so many webinars and chats, and that involved mindfulness for teachers. It involved affinity spaces for teachers. And it also brought in experts when we talk about social justice, brought in experts around social emotional learning, experts around equity, just to have the topic come to light for teachers to bring back to their own classrooms. And then there have been a variety of needs for transitioning from non-traditional learning environments. We did a survey of about 3,000 respondents, and 80% of them had problems moving online. The instruction was a challenge for them. And so we focused a lot on their needs around technology, how to use technology, when to use technology, what to use it for. And I think those were some of the most pressing needs immediately, because there was no professional development opportunities that were given to them by their districts. And they needed that support system, and our networks provided that. The Core Connection webinars provided that. And so they began to learn from each other little by little to provide what they needed. And then we had 76% of those teachers felt the districts provided some adequate, but not at all adequate support for being online. There were gaps in support for self-care, definitely. And you heard that from Mel, you heard that from Natalie, that there was so much appreciation for the webinars on the topics of mindful breathing and meditative yoga. We had individuals, about 15% were thinking about leaving the classroom because of COVID. And 90% said they could be convinced to stay if people were paying attention to the health and safety of teachers and students, and there was more flexibility, more virtual learning supports, and in cases more compensation, because teachers are spending a lot of their own money during this time.
So thank you, Peggy, for that. I'm wondering how you're feeling about the future, with all of the reflections that you've captured over the course of the engagements with your educators, and all the input that's coming in through the chat. How do you feel, and are there glimmers of hope that we might look to for the future in terms of how we're adapting instruction or supporting our teachers in the here and now?
I think the one glimmer of hope is that COVID has really put a spotlight on inequities, and this can never be hidden again.
Right.
The other piece is to put a spotlight on the strong need for additional support around culturally responsive curriculum, having a real strategy for what teachers can use around the risk of those students who are in poverty, who do not have access to technology, don't have access to being able to get on virtually, and having, you know, systems think about where do they put their funding, and because this will be with us for quite some time. The other thing I think is a bright spot is that teachers now have learned the power of technology and using that in their classrooms. They've learned the power of connecting and sharing with each other. And I think, you know, there's still a lot of struggle out there, but I think it's also more than anything shown the public, it's shown parents a way to advocate for the needs of teachers, and the fact that, you know, this is a complex job, and it just can't be done by anyone. I think one of the comments, and you see it in cartoons all the time, that people are saying, when are you going to take my kids back? I don't know how you do this. I could not do it every day. And I'll put one concern in there for special needs, and how, you know, that can't be done virtually all the time. It's impossible. And how do we pay attention to special needs? They have significant needs, and how do we support them? And how do we make sure that the funding is there in order to do that?
So well said. And, you know, I think the opportunity for public awareness and public engagement and appreciation of our teachers is an opportunity that we can seize in the here and now, as parents and the public across the country are recognizing just how dedicated, how talented, how tenacious and innovative our teachers are in building those relationships with our learners, in supporting them in the here and now. And, you know, it's a moment for us to turn the corner on a history of inequity that we've seen in our system, that we've all tolerated, honestly, for so long, but that COVID lays bare in a way where hopefully we can emerge with some strategies that get more directly at addressing those inequities in our schools and across our system. So thank you, Peggy, so much for all of those contributions. Let me go ahead now to Jess to close us out a bit, and to just share some of your reflections, Jess, as our lead commentator here on the insights and perspectives that have been shared so far by Mel and by Natalie and Peggy.
Thank you, Roberto. I just want to thank all of you, Roberto, Peggy, Natalie, and Mel, for sharing your insights today. You are doing very important work in elevating teachers. And I am personally beyond thrilled that the topic of today's Learning Tuesdays is about lifting up teacher voice, because as a teacher leader, I believe that is the best way to serve children. Mel, I loved your analogies, so here's another one for you. The other day, a colleague said that right now, educators are building the plane while flying it. And it really struck me. We are navigating uncharted territory, as you said, and we're all doing our very best to learn what we need in the moment to meet the needs of our students. But I'm not gonna lie, most educators are not okay right now. There is an almost universal experience of stress, anxiety, isolation, the fear that we will not be able to meet the needs of our students on the other side of the screen. And, you know, so much of teaching is about control, which was mentioned today. You know, we control the environment that our students work in, who they sit with, where they sit, the little nonverbal cues, that little tap on the shoulder to encourage our kids. And a lot of that is lost in the virtual space. But as Roberto talked about, there are opportunities emerging and a silver lining. And so I'm going to focus on that. After listening to today's presenters, the idea that we should not only give teachers a voice, but respond to their suggestions is, I think, one of the most important opportunities to carry forward beyond this pandemic. Teachers are always on the front lines, whether we're in a pandemic, whether we're dealing with all of the inequities that our students face. They've always been there, and they're often not tapped into to advise on what's best for their students. The 5 findings of barriers to bridges are my lived experience. So it was really nice to hear them fleshed out in writing. I so appreciate what Teach Plus has done by highlighting the realities of this pandemic on education and allowing teachers to guide the work. The insights collected from the report not only make sense to me, but should be shared with every school district, because not only do they identify barriers to learning, they make suggestions of how to respond. So leave it to teachers to identify a problem and offer a solution. That's what we do best. Like the report said, we are in a transformative point in education, and inequities are glaring. Innovation is now a necessity. It's not something that teachers can choose. If they want to tap into it, they have to. And I am excited about that, because I think teachers are learning and growing probably more than they ever have, even though we're experiencing such a challenging time. Roberto and Mel and Natalie, you touched on the changing role of parents. And this is one aspect of the pandemic that I'm feeling particularly optimistic about. We've known for a very long time that a strong partnership between family and school leads to better educational outcomes for students. The campaign for grade level reading has been working very hard to elevate this idea, and now this pandemic has sort of forced our hand. We have to work side by side. Teachers cannot do this without families, and vice versa. There seems to be a deeper appreciation for what teachers do for students, and teachers are having to communicate in ways that they never have before. And I can speak from experience, because I have a 6-year-old at home, and he cannot do what he needs without me, and I cannot do what I need to do without his teacher. So, we're now in a mutually beneficial relationship, and the hope is that that carries forward beyond this pandemic. The work Peggy and her organization have done should be a model for districts everywhere. The National Board for Professional Teaching Standards truly worked with teachers. They listened to them and then turned around and provided learning opportunities based on their needs. And I guess while this isn't something that should be considered revolutionary, it never happens. Teachers are often provided professional learning on what a district deems necessary, and it's often not based on the needs of teachers. We know that a highly effective teacher in a physical classroom does not equal a highly effective teacher in a virtual space unless they have the necessary professional learning opportunities. So I really appreciate that Peggy and her team made sure to do what was necessary to build capacity in their already strong pool of teachers. A week before we went back to school, I had the opportunity to provide professional learning to our teachers in the Philadelphia School District around our new math framework. And so we held a 3-day workshop that thoughtfully unfolded the new math framework in very engaging ways. But during the first 2 days, we kept hearing from teachers that they wanted something more. They wanted to learn how to use a very powerful math platform called Desmos, which is what we were using to facilitate the sessions. And I was really proud that we had like a facilitator huddle that Thursday, and we decided to pivot and actually give teachers what they were asking for. And it was really special when teachers were unmuting themselves in a webinar or a training of 175 teachers to say thank you, because finally the district responded to what they were asking for and gave them what they needed. And I think that this is so powerful. I just also want to say that the 5 core propositions, in my opinion, should be mandatory reading for every educator. It should be a mantra taught in teacher preparation programs. And I love that, Peggy, that you referred to it as a Hippocratic oath for teachers. It really encompasses everything that an accomplished, highly effective teacher needs to be and needs to, think about. So I would say that my questions, my thinking now is, how do we transfer this notion of lifting up teacher voice, and how do we carry it forward? How do we maintain the momentum of the good things that are happening? Because there are some really good things. How do we seize these opportunities and then coming back to Roberto's initial thought, when you first opened up, you said, how can we practice grace? You know, grace with ourselves, grace with the people we work with. So those are some of the things that I am sort of thinking about. And I'll throw it back to you, Roberto, to maybe digest some of that.
Thank you so much, Jess. Wonderful, wonderful reflections. And, you know, just real question on how do we make this opportunity for our teachers to connect, to have their voice heard by decision makers and leaders, and to shape their own professional learning. How do we make that not a nice to have in this moment, but a must have going forward, is a real, I think, wonderful charge for us all to think about on the other side of this pandemic. Now is an opportunity for our audience to ask their questions and put some of their inquiries in. I invite you to put those in the Q&A box that you have at the bottom of your screen. We want to try to engage our panelists in addressing some of these questions. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and move us into that part of the program, so we have some time here. And I want to begin with a question that Katie posits here. And Katie writes, I appreciate that many teachers are always working to be outstanding for their students. Are districts being real that virtual instruction is never going to be outstanding and that we shouldn't pressure our teachers to make it so? I would love some real-time perspective on this question, because I will tell you, we have some of the most remarkable, distinguished educators that we have the privilege of working with across our network. And I can't tell you the number of them that have come to me and said, I feel like it's my first year teaching again, and I'm trying to figure this all out. And the level, and when we think about grace, the level of pressure, and you heard our educators give voice to this today, is very real, both imposed on ourselves, also how our systems, whether it's principals or other system district leaders, how are they responding to this challenge around and expectations around remote learning?
Roberto,
yes.
I'll just jump in really quickly. Saturday, I was on a webinar with the superintendent in Nevada. And what she did on that webinar, talking about grace, talking about, you know, the room, the ability to fail forward. And I think the more leaders begin to talk to teachers in that way, because intuitively we know this is not the perfect job that we're going to do. We're
Right.
doing the best of our ability, but at the same time, you know, we're intuitive about the big ideas, what really needs to be taught. But we can't teach it if we're not paying attention to the needs of students, their academic needs, their social emotional needs, and the thing that grabs them and keeps them during this time is that relationship that is formed and the caring and engagement that they feel, because that's what they're going to remember after all of this is over. How did they feel?
Absolutely.
I can add to that. I agree with that. And I think it's hard to talk in terms of it being impossible for virtual teaching to be outstanding, because we have data that show that virtual teaching can be very, very effective. Most of that data comes from the college level and of course applies to older students. So my friends who work in professional development and in research at the local university say, you can teach online very effectively, and there are some students for whom online learning they're thriving there. I know as a high school teacher, my ELL students and students who have special needs in my high school, I'm getting more FaceTime with them than I've ever had before, because they feel comfortable asking questions without having to ask them during a passing period in front of all of the students who are still there or in front of the whole class. I can very easily just hop in with one of those students and answer their questions. I think the definition of outstanding definitely needs to be addressed, right? So I think that teachers who want to solve problems and want to be great at what they do, I see them spinning their wheels with all of these apps that are being thrown at them from all different directions. And outstanding education is not the same thing as using all of the electronic bells and whistles that are available to you. Outstanding education is, as I said earlier, grounded in those principles that I shared. CASEL, the organization that works most prominently with SEL in our country, I shared their website in the chat. You know, they've boiled it down to classroom strategies for the beginning, middle, and end that are designed to engage students and provide an equitable learning environment. Virtual learning can be outstanding in those ways, just as face-to-face learning can. But the districts, I don't think districts, to answer your question, are being real about that, because I don't think, you know, we're building the airplane while we're flying it.
Right.
Thank you for the metaphor, Jess. I don't know that districts have the time and space to be real about that right now.
Yeah.
Can I just say, Mel, that I also think that you can't expect to get teachers ready in a week to be outstanding virtual educators. It is a unique skill set that needs to be built, and many districts around the country had maybe a little over a week with teachers before they threw them in the trenches with students. You know, they kind of expected teachers to sort of go about it on their own. And going back to the core, you know, the 5 core propositions, one of them being that you should consider yourself a part of a community. Many teachers I work with were seeking their own professional learning, but it wasn't provided by the districts. And so I think we have to be really clear that things can be outstanding when the right kind of professional learning happens.
And producing good online learning is a different process with a completely different human power structure than the delivery we're used to. So when a team is creating a virtual learning environment, it can be very, very, very good. But if we're all out there creating our individual courses without support from each other, that is very difficult. And I'll just add one more thing. You know, I had teachers who were having this conversation about, well, you know, it takes 10 hours to produce 1 hour of good edited video, right? That's like the industry standard, apparently. And I said, well, a 5-minute video takes me 8 minutes to record, because I have to survive and I have to teach every day. So I need to tell myself that my videos don't have to be outstanding, but my instruction can be outstanding without those videos being professional quality.
Yeah. Thank you all for the response on that. Let me dig into another one here, which is from Dewana Thompson on the relationship with families and parents. So we have a lot of partners on the call that work directly with families and with parents in the context of supporting our students. Mel, I think you mentioned the benefit of building relationships with families, because you're able to go directly with children via Zoom or virtual platforms. All the panelists actually mentioned this. Jess, you reflected on it. What are there other examples of ways where you've seen this remote environment as an asset to building relationships with families?
I have some. So first, a couple other questions that are in here that are around the same thing. I can kind of lump in with this one a little bit. So as someone said, a light is being shined on the equity issues. So in our district immediately when the pandemic began, worked to do something we'd been asking them to prioritize for years, which is move to one-to-one devices and support Wi-Fi for poor students. We are a Title I urban district, and immediately they began working on fundraising for issuing those devices. So now when we have a parent meeting, instead of it being the 8 parents who weren't working at that time, who had transportation to get to our building, our 1,100 student building, 8 parents, same ones showing up every time, we hold a virtual meeting, and our our students teach the parents how to get into the meeting. The first meeting was the cutest because you could hear people who didn't know how to mute saying, "Hey, I got on, I'm in here, I see them." So we had these people who have been disconnected from our school, who are so important, who are now connected to our school. And I know that our situation is not the same as everyone's, but we are a poor district where we can now connect with families more effectively. And my daughter's school, which is a middle school, we say they broke the internet on the first meeting of the year because they exceeded the Zoom call limit for families that showed up to those meetings. And it was really, really amazing.
Fantastic. Thanks,
I
Mel.
just want to add, like, and this kind of touches to the SEL part, like, I now have parents that are doing our morning meetings with us with their student and really going through all these different social skills that we're talking about. And I even have parents joining in whenever we do like mindfulness activities or like breathing activities. And so that is just a cool way. Like, I never would have experienced that. And just, I think the student also seeing their parent doing those things, and hopefully like these skills. I mean, we have a domestic violence shelter and a homeless shelter in our attendance zone. And so I know we have students with trauma, and so I know their parents are dealing with trauma. And so just to see those parents join like our mindfulness activities and our breathing and our de-escalation stuff is a way I never would have been able to connect with those parents or share those skills before.
I would add that, you know, the fact that we have to do things virtually, like these meetings, you know, we always used to do a coffee with the principal, and it was always at 9 o'clock. Like, you know, parents, a lot of working parents cannot attend something at 9 o'clock. I think moving forward, like carrying this beyond the pandemic, every meeting is going to be streamed because every parent should be able to hear what's happening in their child's school. All of our district meetings now, you know, any of these announcements that are happening are also made available to everybody using Facebook, really meeting teachers where they are. I mean, families where they are. We have teachers now who are using the Remind app because they've found that the power of texting to reach out to families. So I do see that we're being so much more inclusive of people, and you know, that normally wouldn't have been able to be a part of these meetings and know what was going on.
I think also parents have seen what teachers do in the classroom that they normally don't see. We had one teacher got a call from a parent with a special needs student that just was so upset, and there was nothing they could do to calm them down. This teacher made her own hazmat suit, went over to the house, and through, you know, the glass door, calmed the student down, talked to them, went through a lesson with them, and then even sat, you know, on the other side of the glass and had dinner with them and just stayed with the student. And these are things that, you know, that's what that teacher does in the classroom, but now that parent got to see how devoted that teacher was to their child and how important that child was by doing that and coming. And these are things that are highlighted that haven't been highlighted before.
Yeah, thank you, Peggy. It's definitely a moment to be able to celebrate that connection with parents and families, and for that level of engaged and shared understanding of what it takes to build those relationships and to be effective with students and to help facilitate their learning. So you have a poll, you all have a poll that's popped up on your screen now. I'm going to ask you to spend a couple of moments, if you wouldn't mind, giving us some feedback on today's webinar. We hope it's been helpful and insightful to you. So I just want to make that announcement. We have time maybe for one more question, and I'm seeing a lot of reflection in the chat on a couple of fronts. One is from philanthropists and other groups that have financial help or volunteers in their corporation or organization, or want to personally get more involved and engaged in supporting teachers in their local schools and their student success. So one question is, what is your best advice to those individuals, right? Whether it's United Way or local philanthropy, others. And I'm going to pile on one other additional one there because I can't resist. We've talked a lot about resources in the context of today's conversation. And There's a great question here from Cynthia on how do we really help our elected officials and those that are making decisions at the system level embrace and better understand the fact that we need more resources, adequate and equitable resources, to be able to respond to these twin pandemics. So if you have advice for our audience on how to have their voices be part of the movement for those resources that we so desperately need, I would love to hear that as well and capture that.
I have a quick list. One is, it looks like some people on here are in districts where one-to-one isn't happening or Wi-Fi hubs are not happening. And so there was a question about what if the family doesn't have Wi-Fi? And we have lots of families who don't. So our district has delivered Wi-Fi hubs to their houses, and in some cases like parked a Wi-Fi vehicle outside of their apartment buildings. So if you can help get students access to technology, that's wonderful. We also have community organizations that are acting as learning hubs for students who are homeless or have an unstable home environment. So we have 20 plus zip codes served by our school alone. And so we have community organizations that kids can walk to where they can get Wi-Fi, have a safe space to learn in a smaller group. So they're not breathing the breath of 1,100 students, they're breathing the breath of the 15 kids in that church building or that community organization. And then finally, I think that anything you can do to bring mental health care to students and teachers. One thing we're working on is trying to get group therapy for teachers in our school district so that when a teacher shows up and is in crisis, we can send them somewhere, because right now we don't really have anywhere to send them. And the same thing with students, and supporting, all of those social student support organizations and links you can.
Thanks, Mel. Peggy, did you have something
Yes.
to add to that?
I think for me, it is supporting teachers in their professional development. So many teachers want to learn so much, and having them be able to choose that professional development so that it's not a hit and miss and it's a drive-by. And Jess brought this up about infusing the 5 core propositions. We're doing that more and more in higher ed, but to have teachers actually go through the process, they can support teachers through that. There are organizations out there like Online Match to go through the process of board certification. Whether you match with Donors Choose, put something up on Donors Choose. Let teachers choose their professional development and how they want to meet their needs, whether it be for their own social emotional learning, whether it be for their students and their colleagues all together. But that support is necessary. And we know that the teacher is the most important factor in student achievement right now. And to have them supported means that we're supporting students.
Thank you. Any other last words or reflections on that question or on any others?
I just answered a question about SEL, and a couple people asked about it. If you have 80% of your students experiencing trauma, how do you deal with it? And I just think it has to be built into the curriculum for all students, because it's just good practice. It's important to teach children how to tap into their social emotional learning. It's important to support them, because every child experiences some type of challenge. And in Philadelphia, we've really prioritized SEL, and every morning in our classrooms, there's 30 minutes of a community meeting that involves some type of embedded SEL lesson for students. So I do think it's possible, and it has to be done on a larger scale.
The science of learning there, and those relationships, those social and emotional connections and relationships with adults around them, so important for our student success. And we have to really seize that science and those lessons to build from. So thank you all so much. Let me invite you all to show your appreciation for our distinguished panelists today, and for their insights and their contributions to today's discussion. This is definitely an ongoing piece of work, right, throughout this school year. But we hope to continue to learn and to share and to grow together. And we thank you for taking time today to be with us, and to our panelists for sharing your lessons and insights with us. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Yoli.
Thank you, Roberto. I am left feeling quite overwhelmed on the one hand, but also incredibly inspired by all of you, and the comments in the chat you'll see reflect people's appreciation for just such an honest and deep conversation from teachers, from educators. And as you said, both at the top of the hour and throughout, this is a moment when we have to give each other a lot of grace. For the educators, for our parents, for our kids, it is a time like no other. So thank you, Roberto, for helping us design this conversation today, for moderating. Peggy, thank you for joining us. Mel, Natalie, Jess, really appreciate your thoughts, your insights, and more than ever, your commitment to our kids. So thank you again. Just before we close, you'll see on the screen our upcoming webinars. As you see in the second of the two listed here, we will continue to have more conversations about learning loss. But first, next week is a conversation that we actually started in November, before we knew how important digital everything was. We were talking about virtual home visiting. Since that time, many of our partners in this space of home visiting have been working fast and furious to really scale this notion of virtual home visiting. So we invite you next Tuesday, September 22nd, to learn about this particular work and how the field is scaling and what we're learning from that. And then on September 29th, in continued response to learning loss recovery, is a conversation with superintendents and other district leaders on their solutions in terms of high tech and high touch for kids as we are back to school. So join us for that one on September 29th. So with that, thank you all again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week. Stay healthy and safe. And thanks again. Bye-bye.